morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate jumping on to our GP webinar series. We have Mark Polino here today, and he is a principal consultant here at IBIS, the CPA, as well as a Microsoft MVP. So we are so lucky to have him presenting. Mark, I'll let you go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Ann. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
Just yell into your phones. It's okay.
Doing great.
Great. Perfect. Nobody's snowed in, right? Everybody's good to go? So the good news today is we actually have a live audience here while I'm doing this presentation. We've got one or two people in the room here with me, so we'll see if we can have some fun with this today. This webinar is a little different. We're doing a deep dive into the DEX.ini file. So this is not your fluffy, here's all the pretty stuff. We're diving deep into the innards of Dynamics GP. So if you've never gone into the innards, today is the day that we go there. Before we get started, feel free to tweet, blog, update Facebook with things you learned in this session. We want you to share. We don't want you to learn something and then just keep it to yourself. We want you to share with other people. That's what this is all about. So what's the DEX.ini file? It's a Dynamics GP settings file. It's used in launching Dynamics GP. For local install, so this is the term is fat clients. If you go to a computer and install GP on each user's computer, that's a local install. This is normally not a shared file. Each PC has its own DEX.ini file. One of the benefits of this is you could actually tweak a particular workstation to work one way or another, and we'll look at a little bit of this. If you're using Terminal Server or Citrix, then all of the users on that server are going to share a DEX.ini file. So you really want, if you're using, say, multiple terminal servers, you really want them all to be the same, or you can really frustrate your users. And so we will look at that in a few minutes. So why do you care? Why are you here today? Because the DEX.ini file can really provide some incredible control over the way that Dynamics GP behaves. Some settings that you change through the interface are stored in the DEX.ini file, meaning you can make changes and pass out that file without having to go and touch everybody's machine. Sometimes you want to make temporary changes for support or troubleshooting. Sometimes you want to make a permanent change with the way things work. So it's really an important tool for both troubleshooting and performance tuning. Now, big red warning, you can break Dynamics GP with the DEX.ini file. The good news is you can fix it again really, really easily, but it's really helpful if you make a backup of the DEX.ini file before you start making a lot of changes to it, because you can impact the way that Dynamics GP works, and you'd hate to not be able to get it back to where you were if you screw something up. Also, if you truly screw it up, I'm going to charge you an awful lot of money to come and fix it, especially if we find out that you sat through this whole webinar and then didn't take our advice about backing things up. There's a bonus penalty fee that goes along with that. All right, so how do we mess with the DEX.ini file? The default location for GP 2010 is that it is in C, Program Files, Microsoft Dynamics, GP 2010. The key is that it's in the Data folder. In GP 10, it is in the Data folder, and in previous installs, it is in the base GP folder. It's not in the Data folder. So you're going to go back up the DEX.ini file, and you're going to open it up in Notepad. Pop over here really fast. I can show you what this thing looks like just to give you an idea. Now, when you open this, so you see it's just a bunch of settings with settings, equal signs, those kinds of things. And we'll dig through some of these. You don't want to use Microsoft Word. You don't want to use WordPad. You really want to use Notepad, Notepad+, TextPad, a true text editor, because you don't want all kinds of junk in there. Otherwise, GP may decide it doesn't want to load. If we're working through here and you see a setting that looks interesting and you go to your DEX.ini file and that setting doesn't exist, don't worry, you can just add it to the file. All right, so let's talk about some of these settings, because that's really the deep dive here. What are the kinds of things you can set in the DEX.ini file, and then we'll dig into some really cool ways to manage it. So one thing that's in a lot of these are path settings. For example, the path where the OLE objects that are attached to Dynamics GP notes are stored. So here in Dynamics GP, if I'm working in a transaction, I've got a notes field. I can attach, I can come here and I can look up an item. I can insert a new object, maybe an Excel spreadsheet or a PDF file, and it's going to store that location, especially if I link to a file, it's going to store that link in the location specified in the DEX.ini file. In a basic install, this will always point to a local location. That means you really can't share these things, and most of the time you really want to share them. So if you've got local installs, you want to make sure that these OLE paths are the same for every user. Now there are two in here. One is for regular notes, and the second one is for HR payroll notes if you have HR payroll installed. It makes sense that you might want your HR payroll notes to go to a different place than your regular notes. The other key is that if you're using terminal servers or Citrix, maybe you have a terminal server farm with 3 terminal servers, you want all of them pointed to the same location. Otherwise, the user might log on to one terminal server, link something, everything's good to go. The next day they log on to a different terminal server and all their links are missing. So it's important in the setup to make sure that all these are set in the same place. This is a place you can set it, make sure that it's consistent for all the users. Then in fixed assets, there's a pile of paths that are used for setup and other things inside of fixed assets. It's actually here, tools, setup, fixed assets, and user preferences. So this is the physical asset inventory import. If you import your physical counts of fixed assets, group imports, asset imports, exporting asset IDs, all of those kinds of things, all of those paths are also set in the DEX.ini file. So when you set them in the interface, it comes back and makes the changes in the DEX.ini and vice versa. DEX.SQL log is a troubleshooting tool that we will dig deeper in. Normally when you create a DEX.SQL log, it puts it in the same place as the DEX.ini file, but if you want it in someplace else, you can change the path. As I said, we will get deeper into this one, but that's where you change the path. In addition, we can set the path to the Dynamics help files. So sometimes people have moved the Dynamics install around, they lose the connection to help, folks push F1 and nothing happens. In most cases, that's because the path has been lost to the help file. You can come in here, set that in the DEX.ini, point it to where your help files are located, and all your users then can have access. Another common item is Integration Manager. If you don't have the path set in DEX.ini, even though you're properly registered for Integration Manager, when you go to use it in Dynamics GP, they're grayed out. So I've got it registered, I've got it installed, I can run it from the menu, but I can't run it from GP because it's not in the DEX.ini file. This is the path to, place where you set the path to Integration Manager. So another area of the system that we can control are printing settings. This one I actually really like. We can set the default magnification for reports that are printed to screen. So this is really useful if you have local installs. Let's say that I have a visually impaired user who would really like their screen prints to be larger. Well, we can, so inside of Dynamics GP here, I've got a transaction. I click the print button, send it to the screen, and the magnification is going to default to 100%. That's set in the DEX.ini file. For most folks, it defaults to 100%. This is what you're used to seeing, but with the DEX setting, you can default it to something larger. Maybe you're like me and you're getting a little older and you're too vain to go find new glasses, so this is your solution. If you use project accounting, this is sort of a strange place for this setting, but it is in the DEX.ini file. You can force fees to print before the cost categories on a project accounting invoice. Not sure why you would want to control it with the DEX.ini, but generally fees print after the cost categories, and with this setting you can force them to print before. And then there's a bunch of controls that we're going to look at here related to printing and named printers. So in GP, when you start to work with named printers, so Tools, Setup, System, and Named Printers, a box pops up, and there's an option here to Do Not Display the System Print dialog. Well, rather than going, this is controlled by machine. Well, rather than going around to every machine and checking this box, you can simply change it in the DEX.ini file and copy the DEX.ini file to everyone's machine. The DEX.ini setting is is no print dialogs equals true. Simple enough. And in addition, when we're working with named printers, let me catch up here. We've got a machine ID. We can set the machine ID you see here via the DEX.ini file as well. So rather than having to do this through the interface, we can do it at a file setting location. We can also turn off named printers for that workstation if this isn't something you want to use by sticking a semicolon in front of the machine ID setting. You can stop named printers from being used on a workstation completely by removing all of the ST lines. Those are the lines that really control named printers. I have no idea why it's called ST. I'm sure there's a perfectly good explanation. I have no idea what it is. And then you can turn off the setting of default printers at the same point. When you pop into named printers for the first time and click OK, it's going to ask you to set a default printer. If you don't want to do that, you can force that to not come up again by turning that off in the DEX.ini file. Another related piece, I'll give you some resources to dig deeper into this, but when you're working in SOP, there's a quick print feature that is actually part of named printers. So options, quick print setup, some of these settings can actually be controlled in the they can actually be controlled via the DEX.ini file as well. And it's sort of a strange interface because it's just a bunch of numbers that control that. But there are two ways you can set this. One, I'll give you a document with more information that you can drill back on. Or secondly, you could actually go and set it on one workstation the way you want it to be, and then go grab those settings from the DEX.ini file and be able to populate it either to other workstations or copy it to other terminal servers. Another setting is the size of the record window. So here, when we pick our record note, oops, grab a document really fast. Pick our record note, you see I've got a huge window here. Well, I know warehouses, for example, often have older computers with smaller resolutions, and so if you've got this giant window popping up, it may be a pain in the neck for them. You can set the default window, and actually, so when I shrink this down, it should save this, and then set that in the DEX.ini file. So then I can go to the DEX.ini file, grab those settings, and be able to populate it either to other warehouse computers or to the terminal server that the warehouse is connecting to, and set that to a default note window size. In addition, we can add a new button for troubleshooting processes that are running. So Q more info equals true adds a new window to the process monitor. Process monitor here in Dynamics GP is right here. This shows any running processes. If you have printing that is running, posting that is going on, those kinds of things. Actually, I don't have it turned on. It actually adds another button right here to give you more info. It's really useful too with if you're using process servers, because you can actually see what items are, whoops, where's my, there we go, over here have been pushed off to remote processors. If you do a lot of work with macros, there's a Show Advanced Macro menu that you can turn on. This shows you advanced items around troubleshooting for macros. I know that's pretty advanced for most folks, but at least you'll know that it's there. We can also show all of the menu items even if the user doesn't have access to it. So I'm logged in as SA, so I see all of these menu items here. If my permission was restricted to not allow transactions, I would see something that looks like this, where I don't have any selections to choose from, but maybe I still have access to cards over here. Well, if you want to show everybody everything, even though they don't have access to it, you can do that. It's simply a setting in the DEX.ini file. Another item is the ability to suppress the date change dialog. Where this comes from is for folks who run integrations with Integration Manager. At midnight, Dynamics GP will pop up a box and say, hey, you're here working past midnight. Do you want to change the date? For those of you who work past midnight a lot, you've seen this. It's actually relatively convenient if you're working past midnight because you might want it to go ahead and roll to tomorrow's date. But if you have an integration that's running past midnight, this box pops up and it can actually cause your integration to fail. So the purpose behind this is to turn off the warning message. It also does not change the date. So if today is the 25th at midnight, not only will this box not pop up, but the date will not change to the 26th. If you want the date to change to the 26th, there's a free item in the Professional Service Tools library. The Professional Service Tools library is a mix of free and paid tools for Dynamics GP. One of the free tools is that it will change the date, even with this dialog, or even with this setting turned on. Still more system and security settings here. If you're using versions prior to GP10, you're using GP8 or GP9, you have both regular security and advanced security. And sometimes you just want to use regular security. You know exactly what security setting you want to do. You just want to go and make the change. But a box pops up that says, hey, you have both security and advanced security installed. Do you want to open advanced security? And you have to say no every time. Well, you can turn this off with a setting. It's WDC security disable warning equals true. It's that simple. So I know there's a secret group out there who you're just so enthralled with Dynamics GP that you're sitting in bed with your spouse, you've got the computer on your lap, you're supposed to be watching maybe Home and Garden with them, but instead you are feverishly working in Dynamics GP, and you don't want them to hear the bings and bells and whistles to tell them, hey, you're not really paying attention to what's going on in the latest gardening show, you're desperately working on accounting stuff. So you can turn off the sounds inside of Dynamics GP. Now, I know that's a really far out example, but I can't figure out any other reason why you would care about turning off the sounds in Dynamics GP versus just turning off the sounds in your computer altogether. But you can do it, and that's really what's important, is knowing what you can do. Something that is a little more useful, when you roll down new updates, software to your users, whether you drop it into a folder or use the roll down functionality inside of Dynamics GP, it drops a chunk file, a CNK file. And when a user fires up GP on their workstation, or the first user to fire up on a terminal or Citrix server, they get a message that says, do you want to add new code? And your user freaks out because nobody's ever asked them to add new code. They don't know if they're allowed to add new code. That sounds dangerous. Well, you can eliminate that warning. It's auto-install chunks equal true. The code will install automatically. The only thing you need to be careful of is, depending on your UAC settings, if a user has their UAC locked down too much, it's possible that they have to be an administrator to install that code one way, or to install that code either way. So it's not perfect because of some issues around UAC, but if the user can normally add a chunk file, they will still be able to add a chunk file this way, and it'll roll right on in. Another one that I really like, when you log into Dynamics GP, if you're having one of those days where your fingers and your keys are not in sync and you manage to type your password incorrectly 3 times, GP goes away and closes and you've got to open it back up again. Well, you can change that number. The default is 3. You can change it to something a little more reasonable like 5. You can change it to -1, which will let you try an unlimited number of times. That's probably not recommended for security, but it's an option. It's SQL num login tries equals and then a number, whatever you want it to be. How about some reporting settings? This is where we really start to fine-tune some stuff inside of Dynamics GP. For those of you who use British pounds, if you export foreign currency to Excel from a smart list, it treats it as a text field because it sees the pound symbol and says, oh, this must be text. If you want to treat that as a currency symbol, you can simply change the Explorer format currency equals false. That's the setting that changes it. So if you work in US dollars, it's not an issue because SmartList sees dollars as a currency symbol, and I want to say some of the other currency symbols because they are truly symbols like Canadian dollars or yen, I think work correctly, but British pounds and some of the others, because they also work as a letter or as something other than a special character, they come over wrong. So this can help you fix that. So this next one, before some of you get too excited, let me make sure I'm really careful with it. If you're exporting out of Report Writer to a CSV file, often the body of the report wraps. And so not only do you have to strip off the headers and the footers, but the stuff that you have in the middle, one record covers multiple lines. Well, if you change this setting, export one line body equals true, then any text reports out that you export to a CSV, instead of wrapping those lines, they will be one big long line. So all you really have to do at that point is strip off the headers and split the line out in Excel. So if you're having to carve those things up, this can definitely save you some time. I tend to not have to do this anymore unless I'm pretty desperate. Between refreshable Excel reports and smart lists, I find myself having to print reports to CSV files much less. But if you still have to do that, it's a great option. This next one is one of my favorites. There are some caveats that go with it, but we're going to talk about it. There's a new unsupported switch for GP10 and higher. Does not work for GP9. It allows you to send smart lists or navigation lists to Excel much, much, much faster, 10 times faster. It has a few bugs, which is why it's unsupported. One of them is it drops leading zeros. So for some companies, that's a significant problem. This could also be one of those DEX.ini files for an individual where it makes sense to set it when they have to do particular exports that are really huge and then turn it back off for all of their regular stuff. So if you're in a smart list, currently by default, smart list items and navigation list items go to Excel line by line. Sends a line to Excel, sends the next line to Excel. What this switch does is it changes the way that works. SmartList will bundle everything up into a package or a batch and ship it off to Excel in one big batch. So what you see when you run it now is instead of stuff going to Excel immediately, there's a couple of second delay while it bundles this thing up to a batch, and then it actually will send these items to Excel faster than it can populate the window for SmartList. Like I said, there are a couple of issues with it. If you like this, and I see lots of people who like this and like at least the promise of what this can do, let Microsoft know. Drop me an email. I'll forward it on to them. Go on to Microsoft's site. Sorry, I don't have the reference, but I can get it to you. There's a spot where you can make product suggestions. Tell them that you want this to be a supported feature so that stuff can come smoking out of SmartList and into Excel. Now, I told you that this only works for GP10 and GP2010. If you are working in some of the earlier versions of Smart List, you have your own setting that only works for items pre-GP10. There's a switch in the DEX.ini file called Smart List Match Case Pressed equals true. Setting this to true causes the Smart List query engine to build a more efficient query. So this reduces index and table scans. It makes loading the Smart List box considerably faster. It doesn't send it to Excel any faster, but it returns the results faster. It makes a few changes in the background. Essentially, it is marking a few items. It's forcing the marking of a few items rather than leaving it up as an option for the user. This is also something that Dwight Specht, our Chief Operating Officer, is a big fan of. He's actually one of the people who sort of highlighted this a couple of years ago. So that's a nice piece. How about some behavioral settings? If you work with payroll, you can change the way that employee lookups default, by last name, by first name, or by social security number, simply by plugging in EMP lookup equals 2, 3, or 4. One other little piece, if you work with inventory, then you probably know that up here in utilities for inventory is an adjust cost item. And the idea behind adjust cost is maybe something has happened to change the cost of an inventory layer. So for example, I've brought in a whole bunch of items, things are looking good, and before I sell them, suddenly a giant freight bill comes in, and I need to go and up the cost of those items that are sitting in my warehouse because they really cost me a whole lot more than what I thought. Or we brought them in at the wrong cost. I worked for a company, and for a while we just had a terrible time getting bubble wrap priced correctly. For some reason, we would have rolls of bubble wrap valued at $10,000 because they goofed on the unit of measure. If you know anything about bubble wrap, it takes an awful lot to get to $10,000. So we'd have to come in and adjust the cost and fix it. Well, when you do that, just change the cost here. It makes a journal entry for you. If you do multiples of these, it rolls them all up into a summary journal entry that is available to post. And does that when you check the process button. If you want those to go as individual, as a detailed journal entry instead of a rolled up journal entry, you can change that with a setting in the DEX.ini file as well. It's revalue in detail equals true. Okay, let's talk about a couple of performance things, and then we'll look at how to make working with the DEX.ini file considerably easier. So there's a setting called idle loop value equals number, and it's really a performance setting playing with the way that GP interacts with background tasks. So one option is idle loop value equals 0. And when you do this, GP, when the CPU is sitting idle, GP will give up access to background tasks. What this means is that GP actually runs slower, but the CPU never pegs at 100% utilization. So other background tasks will continue to run. Another option is to set idle loop value equal to 1. This is going to give you the highest performance. This is going to give the highest performance to Dynamics GP. This is actually the default setting, so most of you are not going to go and have to fool with this. But if you check your DEX.ini and it's set to something other than 1, then you at least know you can set it back to 1 to force GP to have the highest possible settings, performance settings there. There is one other option, and that's to set it to some number other than 0 and 1. In essence, what this is saying is give up background processes, but not all the time. I don't have a lot of guidance for this because not a lot of people mess with it. Microsoft says the number should be between 5 and 10 and should never go above 200, even though the maximum is 500. I have no idea what the negative consequences are going to be if you fiddle with this. Probably nothing other than maybe performance hits. But most folks leave this on either 0 or 1, and the reality is 99% of the people leave it on 1. but at least you know that the options are there. If you find that it's set to 0, you've got an option to get some better performance. One more piece, if you use process servers, you can tell the engine which instance of a Dynamics process server to use. So if you think about a terminal server farm with 3 terminal servers, each one pointed to its own process server to be able to offload posting processes to, you could then force each terminal server to point to a specific process server, and then you would know where any bottlenecks are coming from. All right, almost done. Troubleshooting settings here. The DEX.SQL log is extremely cool for troubleshooting. As consultants, we use it a lot. There are really 2 lines that you need to set, logging ODBC messages and logging SQL statements. Microsoft's documentation often has a 3rd line. This 3rd line is 100 years old and actually does nothing in any of the SQL versions of Dynamics GP. I've confirmed that. I've confirmed it with Microsoft, and I've confirmed it with other MVPs. So you really only need 2 lines. Creating this thing is a dance, though. What you've got to do is you pop over to your DEX.ini, you close down Dynamics GP. I'm going to shut these things down. We're not going to go through the whole thing, but you'll get an idea of what a pain in the neck it is to create one the first time. Or maybe I am going to shut down GP by mistake. So you shut down Dynamics GP, you pop open the DEX.ini file, and you make a bunch of changes. And then you pop back into Dynamics GP, and you start your process that you want to log. Maybe I'm getting an error when I start a GL transaction. So I get all the way to the point right before I get the error, and I work my way through that in GP. And then I pop back to my DEX.ini location. I'll have a DEX.SQL log file in this location, and I delete it. Because all I want in that DEX.SQL log is the minimum amount of stuff for troubleshooting. Then I pop back into Dynamics GP, and I do the rest of my transaction, and I get to the point where I'm just past or just get to that error point. I pop back into the DEX location, and I rename my DEX.SQL log. That way the only thing I've got in there is the minimum amount of stuff that I need in order to troubleshoot an error. Pop back into Dynamics GP because I may have to clear my error message. If it was in the middle of posting, I'd have to finish that whole process. And then the big key is you come back again, and you've got to turn off those DEX.SQL log settings. Otherwise, you will end up with this gigantic DEX.SQL log that will ultimately eat up all of the space on your hard drive and cause GP to crash. It's lots of fun when that happens, so don't forget to turn it off. I think I counted it, it's like 15 steps. It's crazy. But there's a much, much simpler way to manage that, so we will go and look at that in just a minute here. Before we do that, if you're having some problems with named printers, maybe you've set a named printer, and when you actually print an item, it's not going to the correct printer, you can turn on st_debug equals log. That will log the named printer activities so that you can help figure out what's going on in the background. One other item, I will let you follow the knowledge base here to get the specifics of this because it's really detailed. But with Citrix, not with Terminal Server, with Citrix specifically, there are instances where there are copy and paste issues. There's actually a utility available from Citrix and Microsoft called repair CBDChainexe, and dropping this into your DEX.ini file on the Citrix server can help fix copy and paste issues with Citrix. All right, so the coolest way to work with the DEX.ini file is with the support debugging tool. This is a free tool from Microsoft. You can only get it through your partner, who would be IBIS in most cases for folks on the phone. We'll be happy to send it to you. The way this tool works is it gets installed in Dynamics GP and lets you work. One of the things you can do is work with a lot of these DEX.ini settings without having to fool around with the DEX.ini file. So rather than going through all 15 of those steps to create a DEX.SQL log, you literally check a button to turn it on and check a button to turn it off. You can log the file in the default location. You can create logs based on date and time. You can create a specific location if you want to put it in a network spot for troubleshooting. So instead of jogging through all of that, this can actually make the settings dynamically to your DEX.ini file, so you don't have to hack your way through the file. But what it's doing is it's going in and flipping those settings even though GP is active. In addition, there's a whole set of DEX.ini settings in here. Remember we talked about exporting the body of a report as one line. We had a setting for that. Well, you can just check a box instead of hunting your way through the DEX.ini file. There's all kinds of troubleshooting steps for report writer in here. Here's our suppressed date change dialog that we talked about. Here's our advanced macro menu that we talked about, showing all menu items. So many of these things, rather than hacking your way through the file, you can actually come here and just check the box and be good to go. As I said, this is available free. We'll be happy to send it to you. It does all kinds of other stuff, but those are the DEX.ini pieces. Big thank you. We've got a couple of pieces still here, but a big thank you to fellow MVP Leslie Bale. I started a process to document DEX.ini files a while back. She beat me to it with a much bigger document. This is the location for it. We've just scratched the surface of the kinds of things you can do with the DEX.ini file. Her document is an incredibly dense 12-page Word document of all of the different DEX.ini files, DEX.ini settings that you can set, what they all mean, what they do, ones that you might see but are no longer used, all kinds of things. So if you really want to dig into this, if you really want to understand your DEX.ini file, this is a great way to do it with this resource. Also, if you have insomnia problems, this can be a great solution for you working your way through this late at night with the sound turned off on Dynamics GP. But the location is here, so we will get this to you, this PowerPoint to you, so that if you do want to dig through the settings in your DEX.ini file, you've got a resource to take with you and really get to the bottom of it. I've got an announcement for this webinar. This is actually a pre-announcement. This item is launching tomorrow. I have a brand new website. It is called mygpsearch.com. It is a custom search engine dedicated to Dynamics GP. There are more than 100 GP-specific sites that have been indexed in here, tens of thousands of support posts, websites, forum, all kinds of stuff about Dynamics GP. It's launching tomorrow with a web interface, a mobile interface, and a dedicated Android app. So if you go over to a coworker's desk, they've got a GP problem, you can whip out your Android phone, put in the error message, get an answer back, and walk away looking like a hero. It looks like this. My GP search. So for example, a popular one has been batches won't post. I click search. And let's see here. We've got can't delete the batch. We've got automatically posting batches. We've got here batches that won't post. So we can drill back into that and figure out the kinds of things that show up, kinds of things that you can tackle if batches won't post. You see it's fast and easy. The mobile one is also really easy to use, so if you have an iPhone or something like that, you can hit the mobile one. If you have an Android, as I said, there's a dedicated Android app. Okay, so enough advertising. Let's go on to something else here. I'm also the author of the Microsoft Dynamics GP 2010 Cookbook. It's available in a real book, a ebook, and a PDF from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or Pack Publishing. There's all kinds of tips for Dynamics GP in here. You can start in the middle, grab a tip, and go on. If you want more tips like this, hit up the Dynamics Care blog or my personal blog at dynamicaccounting.net. I get to write for both of these fantastic sites, and the idea is to give you lots and lots of resources to get better with Dynamics GP. Finally, if you want to follow up, I am really hard to find. IBIS is really hard to find. It's about 3 seconds in Google or Bing. But there's lots of opportunities to follow up, tackle questions, those kinds of things. And so on the live meeting, if you pop up to Q&A, let's see. Jim had a question here. Will Microsoft ever change to UNC pathing for the OLE notes function? The smart aleck answer is, boy, I wish I knew what Microsoft was going to do in the future. The real answer is, I don't know. But let me do a plug for Convergence here. So for folks who are in Atlanta, Convergence is Microsoft's premier customer conference in Atlanta this year. If you really want answers from Microsoft, I'm going to tell you the secret. Go to day 1, which is Sunday. It's being presented by GPUG. And one of the things that they do is there are sessions called Microsoft Conduits. It's the most boring name ever for a session. What it is it's a Microsoft representative, usually someone who is on the program team with influence on the product. A session I went to was with Chad Sogi, who is the program manager for GP and is responsible for deciding what gets into future versions. The particular session I attended was on the cloud. It was him, me, and about 8 other people. And all we did was ask questions back and forth on the Microsoft and cloud computing. So you can pick one of those that deal with support or features and just go and bend Microsoft's ear. It is a fantastic way to really make yourself heard because with only 8 or 10 people in the room, everything you say gets magnified to them. This is not going to be, 1,000 people in a room with a guy at the front. They're very small, very intimate. You can really make your voice heard with Microsoft. Any other questions, either on the phone or via the Q&A and live meeting? All right. With that, folks, have a great day. Go have some lunch, and we'll see you on the next webinar.